When we think about conservation, we usually picture planting trees or, rescuing injured animals. We tend to think of peaceful sanctuaries. But what happens when saving one species requires the literal, high-tech eradication of another? Today in this explainer, we're digging into one of the most intense and morally complicated ecological interventions in human history. We are talking about how the nation of Ecuador actually went to war against goats to save the iconic giant tortoises of the Galapagos Islands. It's a crazy story of survival, military-grade tactics, biological engineering, and the really messy reality of trying to fix our own environmental mistakes.
Here is our battle plan to understand this massive operation. 1. The pirate's legacy. 2. The war machine. 3. Spies and Mataharis. 4. The local resistance. And 5. The ethics of care. I want to start by totally shattering the illusion of a peaceful Galapagos with this eerie quote directly from the source material documenting the project. We are rather like a collective Noah, deciding with a biblical coldness which life forms will be able to accompany us on our new journey in the Ark. I mean, that perfectly illustrates the grim reality at the heart of our explainer today. This wasn't just a gentle rebalancing of nature, it was a cold, calculated decision about who gets to live and who has to die.
Section 1. The Pirate's Legacy. Roots of an Ecological Crisis.
So how did a regular domestic farm animal become public enemy number one in a pristine archipelago? Well, goats didn't just show up recently. Back in the 17th century, pirates actually introduced them to the island as a convenient walking food source. They were there way before permanent human colonization even started in the 1830s. And goats are unbelievably adaptable. Just to give you an idea of their reproductive power, get this. In the early 1960s, fishermen released just 2 goats on Pinta Island. 2. In a single decade, that population exploded to over 41,000. But the real disaster struck in 1966. For centuries, this harsh, jagged lava field, known as the Perry Isthmus, acted as an impassable barrier on Isabela Island. But the goats finally managed to cross it, spilling directly into the pristine habitat of the largest wild population of Galapagos tortoises.
And why was that crossing such a big deal? Think about the matchup here. On one side, you have the native Galapagos tortoise, a heavy, slow-moving reptile with clumsy mechanics, evolving over millions of years just to arch its neck high enough to reach low-hanging leaves. On the other side, the invasive goat, hyper-agile, voracious, and totally opportunistic. Goats would literally stand on their hind legs to reach higher branches, or shockingly, they'd even stand right on the backs of the tortoise's shells to eat. Talk about adding insult to injury. They stripped the forest completely bare, turning lush landscapes into dry, dusty grasslands. The tortoises were quite literally being starved into extinction.
Section 2. The war machine. Proyecto Isabela.
With the tortoises dying off, conservationists realized that minor population control just wasn't going to cut it anymore. They needed total eradication. This launched a staggering international military-style operation. The arsenal included 38 local human hunters plus 100 hunting dogs brought all the way from New Zealand. And because the volcanic rock was so insanely sharp and hot, these dogs actually had to wear special heat-protective boots. The imported high-tech Italian semi-automatic shotguns, and the core of their strategy, helicopters flying over the vast volcanic landscapes serving as mobile shooting platforms. It was an absolute symphony of lethal technology.
The sheer scale of this effort is genuinely hard to wrap your head around, but this number puts it into perspective. 200,000 goats were killed across an area of 600,000 hectares. That is the largest mammal eradication ever attempted anywhere on Earth. Helicopters buzzed over those islands for 2 straight years in a relentless campaign.
But here is where the story takes a fascinating turn. See, if you kill 99% of a population, that last 1% is the absolute hardest to get. The surviving goats actually became educated. They realized humans were no longer their friends. They got incredibly wary, hiding deep under thick vegetation and in inaccessible volcanic caves the second they heard the helicopter blades. The hunters couldn't find them, and if even a few survived, their incredible breeding rate meant the population would just bounce right back. The helicopters and the dogs just weren't enough anymore.
Section 3. Spies and Mataharis. Weaponizing Instinct.
To find those survivors, the scientists had to get incredibly creative. They had to weaponize the goat's very biology against itself. The solution they came up with was ingenious, but man is it brutal. It was called the Judas Protocol. Here's the playbook. Step 1, hunters capture a live goat and fit it with a radio tracking collar. Step 2, they release it back into the wild. Because goats are deeply social herd animals, this lonely goat immediately seeks out other hiding goats. Step 3. The hunters track the GPS signal right to the secret hideout. And Step 4. They fly in, eliminate the hidden herd, but, and this is the key part, they intentionally spare the colored Judas goat. 2 weeks later, the lonely Judas goat recovers, goes out to find another herd, and the cycle of betrayal just repeats itself.
Project Isabella ended up deploying over 600 of these Judas goats. They used males and fertile females at first, but they ran into a major problem. A female Judas goat would eventually get pregnant, and when she was pregnant, her social instinct dropped. She stopped looking for herds, making the tracker totally useless. So the conservationists engineered a third category to make up a third of the force, the Mataharis, named after the famous World War I spy. These were biologically modified, sterile females, designed to be the ultimate, irresistible lure.
The way they created these Mataharis is honestly mind-blowing. Project veterinarians captured female goats, sterilized them so they couldn't reproduce, and then pumped them full of hormones. This extended their estrus, their period of sexual receptivity, from a normal 20 days a year to an astonishing 180 days. They essentially created a new hypersexualized spy goat that constantly sought out males for half the year, leading those remaining hidden populations directly into the hunter's crosshairs. It was literal biological engineering deployed for local extermination.
Section 4. The local resistance, human cost, and backlash.
Now, while the science was working, the social fabric of the islands was completely tearing apart. For generations, goats were a vital source of food and income for local farmers and fishermen. So while the international tourism industry was booming around the tortoises, a lot of locals felt totally marginalized, restricted by these strict new conservation rules. And the pushback was both subtle and overt. Some local hunters hired by the project actually grew sick of the endless slaughter and secretly started sparing young and pregnant goats. To still get paid, they falsified kill records by keeping a stash of goat ears to present as evidence. But most dramatically, angry fishermen deliberately smuggled goats onto completely goat-free islands just to protest the national park's fishing quotas. The goats actually became a symbol of local rebellion against a powerful conservation regime.
Which brings us to Section 5, the ethics of care, the moral fallout. Ultimately, the technical side of the project was a massive success. The goats in the targeted areas were eliminated, and the tortoises began to recover. But the moral fallout of Progetto Isabella definitely lingers. To understand the psychological toll on the people who had to live through this, listen to this quote from a Galapagos resident named Gil. He said, "It wasn't pretty. All these animals left to rot. It looked like someone bombed the islands." You see, project leaders intentionally left the hundreds of thousands of goat carcasses to rot on the volcanic slopes to return nutrients to the soil. But to the locals, it looked like a literal war zone. It was a funeral pyre on impossible size. And it forces us to ask, is this what conservation is supposed to look like?
Researchers studying this event use a fascinating term to describe it: violent care. It represents this deeply uncomfortable terrain in conservation. We usually think of care as benevolent, right? Protecting, nurturing, breeding the tortoises. But here, the intense care and love required to save the tortoises directly translated into the systematic, lethal, taking care of the goats. The logic of saving one life demanded the absolute annihilation of another.
And that perfectly illustrates the messy reality we're left with. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final provocative question. Can care kill? Progetto Isabella proves that in the Anthropocene, this era defined by human impact on the Earth, saving nature is rarely a peaceful process. It requires agonizing choices, biblical coldness, and sometimes a full-scale literal war. Thanks for joining me to explore this complex issue, and I really hope it leaves you thinking differently about what it actually takes to save a species.